Welcome you few, the chosen ones, those who resonate with the unspoken. We all know the old saying, comparison is the thief of joy. But let's be real, there's something even more brutal: exposure. It can strip you bare. I'm talking about that moment, the one most folks won't admit, where your supposed success looks dim standing next to someone who didn't even break a sweat. That's when confidence doesn't just bend, it snaps clean in half. Think about it. We're wired to measure ourselves, it's human nature. But the mind has limits. When it sees a gap that feels impossible to cross, it triggers a collapse. Psychologists call it status collapse. It's a total breakdown of self-image. And let me tell you something, you walking success story. That's what happened to them when they sized themselves up to you. Are you ready to delve into this topic and see how to shine more brilliantly? They thought you were all in the same rat race, clawing for the same scraps. What they didn't see is you weren't even on that ladder. You were out there building something completely different, something massive, while they were still stuck on the first rung. It's like bringing a squirt gun to a raging inferno. They showed up thinking they were prepared, but they were utterly clueless. And now for the almost laughable part. They carried themselves with the swagger of champions, only to realize they were shadowboxing their own insecurities. Meanwhile, you were out here dismantling real obstacles. No wonder their ego threw in the towel before the bell even rang. This is deeper than mere envy. It is worth asking ourselves what really motivates each person. It's about the moment someone thinks they've got you figured out and suddenly sees the light of how far you're traveling on a path never touched by them. That's when their confidence doesn't just get dented, it gets erased. First, they realized your silence wasn't weakness, but a sign of mastery. Can you imagine a more beautiful realization than this? They mistook your quiet for ignorance, for a lack of substance, or the inability to defend yourself. In their narrow minds, silence meant weakness, a surrender. But the truth, the one that hit them hard, was that your silence was mastery. You weren't speechless. You were selective. Every time they tried to bait you into a pointless argument, a proving match, you held firm and let your actions speak volumes. And when the results came rolling in, it exposed everything. They were yelling, you were building. They were performing, you were preparing. That was the blind spot they never saw coming. Because some people confuse noise with power. It is better to build a castle than to blow up balloons. They think the loudest mouth controls the room, but real power doesn't work that way. Authority doesn't shout. It invites you to lean in. That's what you exude. Your silence made them uncomfortable because it shattered their carefully constructed illusions. It forced them to see that while they were playing to the gallery, you were operating from a deeper place, a place that didn't need validation or applause. They wanted you to react, to engage in their ego battle, but you refused. That refusal became the mirror that revealed their limitations. Your silence wasn't passive, it was active discipline. It was the kind of control that comes from knowing your worth and destination. They could spin circles around you with their words, but when the chips were down, your results screamed louder than their noise ever could. And that's when their confidence began to crumble, because they realized that noise doesn't build bridges. Silence does. Noise doesn't create breakthroughs. Focus does. What is more important, shouting or silence? And the more they saw you advancing without playing their game, the more it gnawed away at their carefully crafted self-image. It wasn't just the distance that broke them. It was the realization that you created it in silence. They spent their energy shouting. You spent yours building. And when it came time to measure, all their words couldn't compete with the monument of your quiet discipline. That's when it finally sunk in. Silence in the right hands isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's strength. It's a weapon they never learned to wield. Now think about how that lesson applies to your own life. Second, their effort exposed their limits. Your effort revealed infinite possibility. Let's be real, they gave it their all. Every connection, every trick in the book, every ounce of energy, and they still hit a ceiling. That was their maximum. That was their best. But when they looked at you, they realized your best looked nothing like theirs. Where their effort maxed out, yours was just getting started. That's what shattered their confidence, because it showed them something terrifying. Their limit was your starting line. It's time to ask ourselves, are we able to see our limits? The gap wasn't because you had more resources or advantages. It was because you had a different kind of fire in you. Their effort was fueled by competition, ego, and the need to prove themselves. Your effort was fueled by survival vision and the unwavering knowledge that quitting wasn't an option. They worked to be seen. You worked because you had to keep moving forward. That's why your relentless push produced possibilities they couldn't even imagine. They chased recognition, validation, applause. You chased freedom, healing, and transformation. Can you think about something that has fueled you in the past? That's why your grind resonated deeper, lasted longer, and produced results that their hustle could never replicate. They put in effort and reached a finish line. You put in effort and discovered whole new levels beyond their wildest dreams. For them, effort was the end. For you, effort was just the beginning. What truly broke them was the realization that you weren't straining the way they were. You weren't desperate. You moved with a kind of groundedness and clarity that made it clear your strength wasn't just physical. It was rooted in something deeper, in spirit, in patience, in a resilience they couldn't even measure. And when people witnessed that difference, the comparison was inevitable. Their hard work looked shallow next to your grit. Their achievements looked temporary next to your staying power. That's when it hit them. No matter how much they pushed, they could only stretch to their ceiling. But you kept shattering ceilings, stepping into new territories. And that gap will always exist because they were fueled by competition while you were fueled by purpose. Purpose doesn't just outlast ego, it exposes it. How important is purpose in your life? And when their ego stood next to your purpose, their confidence collapsed under the weight of what they could never reach. Third, they thought they were competing, but you were building universes. They assumed you were in the same race, watching their milestones, secretly trying to keep up. But the truth is, you weren't even competing. You were creating on a level they couldn't grasp. They were obsessed with winning small battles, stacking small victories, trying to impress whoever was watching. Meanwhile, you were shaping entire realities, planting seeds that would outlive applause, building foundations that couldn't be shaken by trends or fleeting opinions. Can you compare your life with the planting of seeds? That realization landed harder than any defeat because it exposed the core truth. They weren't even in your league, and the scoreboard they obsessed over meant nothing in your world. What made the gap unbearable for them was that they lived for validation while you lived for vision. They thought success was about reaching the finish line first, but you weren't running to a finish line. You were expanding possibilities, creating paths no one had seen. That meant no matter how fast they ran, they could only win within a box. You were thinking outside the box, writing the rules as you went. And ego cannot compete with that. They wanted to be admired. They wanted to be crowned as the best. What do you do if the crown does not arrive? But your existence was proof that there's something far greater than being admired. You were chosen to be impactful. Impact doesn't need a medal because it leaves a permanent mark long after the competition is forgotten. That's what destroyed their confidence. They realized the game they were so desperate to win didn't even matter in the grand scheme of things. What unsettled them most was how effortless you made it look, not because it was easy, but because you weren't striving for that shallow recognition. Your energy was different. Their wins came with exhaustion and desperation. Your growth came with endurance and alignment. And when that comparison stood side by side, people naturally gravitated toward you, not because you were louder, but because you were rooted. Their collapse wasn't just about jealousy. It was about the truth sinking in. They were competing for trophies that would gather dust. You were creating legacies that time itself couldn't erase. That's when they understood the gap wasn't about who was ahead. The gap existed because you were never competing to begin with. You were too busy building universes while they were still chasing applause. Let that sink in. Fourth, the gap wasn't money, looks, or status, it was depth. They always believed their edge came from appearances, how much they could flash, how polished they looked, how impressive their titles sounded. And for a while that illusion worked. People clapped, admired, even envied them. But then came the moment when their surface-level shine had to stand next to your depth, and that's when the illusion shattered. They could copy a style, imitate a mannerism, rehearse a few clever words. But what they couldn't fake was the weight of a soul that has lived, endured, and transformed. Is it better to look or to be? Depth isn't for sale. It isn't cosmetic. It's forged in pain, refined in silence, and proven in how you carry yourself when no one's watching. Your depth made their surface-level tricks look like child's play. Their confidence began to unravel the moment people started noticing the difference between looking polished and being rooted. When a room senses depth, shallow confidence collapses. The one who relies on image feels exposed because image can only entertain for so long before people crave substance. And you, without even trying, carried the kind of substance that silences rooms without saying a word. That's what unnerved them. You revealed that they had been surviving off projections while you had been moving from essence. Are you able to move from essence? The gap wasn't material. It was spiritual. They could gain all the money, status, and admiration they wanted, but they couldn't buy wisdom. They couldn't buy discernment. They couldn't fake the presence of someone who has walked through storms and still carries peace. That kind of weight is earned, not displayed. And when people recognized that in you, it exposed the hollowness in them. The hardest part for them wasn't that you had more than them. It was that you were more than them in ways they could never fabricate. A soul with depth will always outlast shallow confidence because depth anchors you while surface-level pride eventually cracks under pressure. What are you doing to become more depth in your life? And deep down, they knew it. They knew they had built their identity on fragile ground while yours was rooted in something timeless. That was the gap that destroyed them, not your success, not your appearance, not your achievements. It was the undeniable fact that they could only perform, but you could embody. And no mask can compete with authenticity carved from depth. Fifth, their crowd applause became hollow once your presence walked in. They had become addicted to applause. Every clap, every nod of approval, every cheer became their oxygen. Their confidence wasn't rooted in who they were. It was borrowed from how many people were willing to validate them in the moment. For a while, that worked. As long as they kept performing, the crowd kept responding, and the sound of approval covered the emptiness inside. But then you walked in and everything shifted. The very people who once screamed for them fell silent because presence speaks louder than performance. Is it important to have presence? Your presence wasn't about volume or flash. It was about essence. You didn't need a stage, a microphone, or theatrics. You carried an authority that couldn't be faked, and people felt it. It wasn't that the crowd stopped liking them. It was that they started noticing the difference between someone who performs for attention and someone who embodies truth. That realization made their applause sound hollow even to themselves. They went from being celebrated to being compared, and that comparison was brutal because no amount of noise could cover the absence of substance. What broke them most wasn't the crowd's reaction. It was the silence that followed. When you're used to being the center of attention, silence is terrifying. It forces you to see that people weren't loyal to you. They were loyal to the feeling you gave them. And when someone else shows up carrying a deeper, truer energy, the crowd naturally shifts. They can't explain it, but they can feel it. That's what happened when your essence entered the room. The spotlight they worshipped dimmed and the hollowness of their performance was exposed. Ego cannot survive without attention. And when they saw that the crowd's eyes no longer sparkled with the same admiration, their confidence cracked. They realized they were only as powerful as their last applause. You, on the other hand, weren't depending on applause at all. You carried something unshakable, something rooted in authenticity. What do you think about dependence on applause? That's why the energy in the room bowed to you without you asking for it. That shift destroyed them, not because you tried to take their place, but because your presence revealed the truth. They never really had a place. They only had a stage. And a stage is nothing compared to a soul that commands respect without saying a word. Now let that sit with you for a moment. Sixth, they learned charisma cannot imitate character. They had mastered the art of charm. With the right smile, the right words, the right performance, they could pull people in and win admiration. They mistook this for power, convincing themselves that charisma was the same as influence. But when the dust settled, when the lights dimmed, and when people started paying closer attention, the truth came out. Charisma can only entertain while character sustains, and that was the gap they could never cross. Charm is a costume. It works as long as people don't look too closely, as long as no one asks the hard questions, as long as the act keeps going. But character is revealed in silence, in hardship, in the choices no one sees. You had been tested in fire, and your authority came not from practiced words, but from integrity that couldn't be shaken. When the two were placed side by side, it was obvious their smooth talk couldn't match the weight of your lived truth. What is more important, character or charisma? What crushed their confidence was how quickly charisma evaporates when compared to character. The same people who once admired their flair started noticing the cracks. They saw the inconsistency, the manipulations, the insincerity. And then they saw you steady, consistent, unshaken, even after everything you've been through. That kind of presence can't be faked, and it made their performance look small, even desperate. Charisma is built on the need to be seen. Character is built on the willingness to stand when no one's watching. They had spent their energy rehearsing appearances while you spent your energy surviving storms and learning from scars. That's why when you spoke, people listened, not because your voice was the loudest, but because your words carried weight. They knew it wasn't theory, it was truth lived out. That was the breaking point for them. They realized their entire identity was tied to how well they could impress, while yours was rooted in how well you could endure. One fades with time, the other grows stronger. And no amount of charm, no amount of manipulation, no amount of showmanship could disguise that reality. Let us reflect on this for a moment. They discovered the hard way that charisma can open doors, but only character keeps them open. And that truth shattered everything they built. Seventh, they realized you don't need them, but they desperately need you. For the longest time, they convinced themselves you needed them. They believed their presence, their approval, or their connections were the reason you could move forward. That illusion fed their ego. It made them feel powerful, important, even superior. But then came the turning point. They finally saw that your life functioned just fine without their validation. You kept going, kept building, kept standing, whether they applauded you or not. That realization was a direct hit to their confidence because it showed them the truth. They weren't holding you up. They were only holding on. Dependence always exposes weakness, and that's what happened to them. They were the ones secretly dependent on your resilience, on your presence, on your ability to keep going despite what they threw at you. Without realizing it, you became the fuel they tried to drain. Are you able to move on regardless what others think of you? Your existence gave them something to measure themselves against, something to mock, something to copy, something to fight. But the moment they saw that your strength didn't require them, their illusion of control crumbled. You, on the other hand, revealed independence in its purest form. You didn't beg. You didn't chase. You didn't crumble when they withheld approval. You showed that your source was bigger than their opinion, and that unsettled them deeply because people who thrive on power games can't stand when someone refuses to play. They discovered that all their threats, all their attempts to pull back their support, all their silent treatments, none of it mattered. You had already learned how to live without them. What broke them most wasn't just that you didn't need them. It was the quiet truth that they needed you. They needed your strength to mirror their weakness, your growth to cover their stagnation, your presence to distract from their emptiness. It is time to ask ourselves who we need and who needs us. Without you, they had nothing to project against, nothing to secretly envy, nothing to draw energy from. That dependency stripped them of their false superiority, and it left them exposed. In the end, it was never you who leaned on them. It was them who leaned on you while pretending they didn't. And when the mask dropped, when it became undeniable that you were thriving without them, their confidence collapsed. Because nothing crushes an ego faster than realizing the person they thought couldn't survive without them was the very person they could never survive without. Let that be a lesson learned. Eighth, they saw that their success cost them their soul. Yours enhanced yours. They did everything the success books told them to do. Network with the right people, bend the rules when necessary, sacrifice relationships for ambition, and chase every opportunity whether it aligned with their values or not. And yes, it got them results. They had the titles, the recognition, the applause. But there was a hidden cost. They never spoke about their soul. With every compromise, every betrayal, every shortcut, they chipped away at who they really were until all that was left was an image that needed constant maintenance. Can we achieve success without paying a big price for it? For a while, they managed to convince everyone, even themselves, that this was the price of greatness. But then they looked at you and that illusion shattered because your success told a different story. You didn't cheat your way there. You didn't bow to every opportunity, and you didn't sell your soul for temporary wins. You bled for your path. You endured storms that would have destroyed most people. You walked through fire and still held on to your authenticity, your integrity, your spirit. That was the difference. They gained success but lost themselves in the process. You gained success and became more yourself in the process. And when that contrast stood side by side, their confidence collapsed. It was the kind of comparison that cuts deep because it revealed something irreversible. They can't get back the bridges they burned. They can't reclaim the innocence they traded for applause. They can't erase the people they stepped on to climb higher. And yet here you are, whole, uncorrupted, carrying both the scars of your journey and the glow of authenticity. That's when it hit them that success without a soul is bankruptcy disguised as wealth. What truly broke them wasn't just your achievements, it was the peace you carried with them. You weren't restless. You weren't haunted by guilt or consumed by paranoia. You could rest in what you built because it was clean. It was real and it aligned with who you truly are. Remember, the secret of success is in inner peace. They, on the other hand, couldn't escape the knowing truth that their wins came at the cost of their own reflection. That's why the gap hurt so much. Their success demanded pieces of their soul as payment. Yours refined your soul and made it stronger. And deep down, they knew the truth. The way they got it is the reason they can never keep it, but the way you got it is the reason it will last. Ninth, they thought you'd collapse without them, but you grew untouchable. They were convinced that pulling away from you, denying you support, or even sabotaging you would leave you broken. In their minds, you needed them to survive. That's why they plotted, schemed, and set traps. They thought their absence or betrayal would be the blow that finished you. But instead of collapsing, you transformed. Every attempt to weaken you became the very thing that made you stronger. That reversal is what shattered their confidence, because it proved they had never held the power they thought they did. What does your strength depend on? Betrayal has a strange way of working. For some it destroys, for others it refines. In your case, it was the latter. Their schemes forced you to find strength you didn't know you had. Their sabotage pushed you to rely on God and your inner resilience more than ever before. Their abandonment taught you how to stand without leaning on anyone. What they designed as punishment became your training ground. They were teaching you lessons they never intended to, and in doing so, they created the very version of you they can no longer touch. What is betrayal good for? The painful irony for them is that their betrayal was supposed to shrink you, but instead it expanded you. They thought they were cutting off your supply, but all they did was force you to discover wells of strength within yourself that can't be tampered with. And once you found that place, you became untouchable. You stopped needing what they withheld. You stopped craving what they dangled in front of you. You stopped depending on their approval, their help, their presence. And that independence killed the illusion of control they held over you. Now, when they look at you, they don't just see distance. They see undeniable proof that their worst actions backfired. Their betrayal became your fertilizer. Their schemes became your staircase. Their attempts to bury you ended up planting you. And when they realized this, their confidence collapsed, because it meant they weren't the architects of your downfall. They were the accidental architects of your rise. That is the ultimate humiliation for someone who wanted to see you fall. Not only did you not collapse, but you became unreachable, strengthened by the very weapons they thought would destroy you. And once a person becomes untouchable, no scheme can rewrite that truth. 10th, their identity was built on performance, yours on essence. Their entire existence depended on how well they could keep the act going. Every smile, every word, every gesture was carefully calculated to maintain an image. They lived in performance mode, terrified that if the mask slipped for even a second, people would see the emptiness underneath. And for a while, the performance worked. It bought them respect, admiration, even influence. But then they stood next to you and everything crumbled. Is it better to perform or to exist? Because while they had to perform to be noticed, you only had to exist. Your presence, stripped of theatrics, carried more authority than their entire show. That was the gap they couldn't bridge. Performance requires constant effort. Essence requires none. Performance dies the moment the spotlight fades. Essence commands respect even in silence. They were chasing applause, desperate to be seen, while you were rooted in something far deeper. Truth, authenticity, and the weight of everything you had survived. That contrast was too sharp to ignore, and it exposed them in ways they couldn't hide from. The breaking point came when people started noticing the difference for themselves. They began to realize that the charm and flair they once admired was hollow, while your steady, unforced presence felt real, trustworthy, and grounding. Without even trying, you stole the stage they worked so hard to maintain. And that was devastating for them because it showed that essence always outlasts performance. The truth is, essence is built in silence, in trials, in the moments no one sees. It's who you are when there's no audience. Let the silence build your essence. That's why your presence carried weight. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't polished, it wasn't for show, it was lived. They couldn't copy it because it wasn't something you could fake, and every time they compared their fragile performance to your rooted essence, their confidence chipped away. What destroyed them most was realizing the exhaustion they lived with. They couldn't stop performing because the minute they did, the illusion would die. You, on the other hand, didn't need to perform at all. You were free in your authenticity, and that freedom was something they could never buy, mimic, or steal. That was the final truth. Performance entertains, but essence endures. And in the long run, essence always wins. 11th, they saw that people trust you beyond titles and roles. They spent their whole lives collecting titles, roles, and accolades, believing that credibility only comes from labels. To them, authority was something you wore, something you could hang on the wall, or something you flashed in conversations to remind people of your importance. And yes, it got them recognition. People respected the position, the title, the badge. But when you entered the picture, everything changed. People didn't need a resume to trust you. They didn't ask for credentials or proof. They trusted you because of your spirit, because your energy carried truth, because your life itself was evidence. Is it better to have titles or spirit? And that stripped them bare because it exposed the emptiness they had been hiding behind their labels. What unsettled them most was how natural it was. You didn't announce who you were. You didn't wave around certificates or try to validate yourself through ranks. Yet people leaned in when you spoke. They believed you when you moved. They respected you without needing a reason. That kind of influence can't be manufactured. It's born from essence, scars, and survival. You didn't study authenticity, you lived it. That authenticity carried a weight that no title could replicate, and it broke their confidence because it made their badges look like costumes. Deep down, they knew the difference. Let's build our personality, not our status. They knew that without their titles, they had nothing to stand on. Take away the role and the room would stop listening. But take away your titles and people would still follow you because what you carried wasn't external. It was internal. It wasn't something granted by an institution. It was something granted by experience and spirit. That truth exposed how fragile their power really was. It crushed them to realize that people can sense the difference between a position and a presence. A position demands respect. A presence naturally commands it. They had to enforce their authority. You simply embodied it. And every time people chose to trust you without you asking for it, their illusion of superiority fell apart piece by piece. In the end, no certificate could cover the hollowness they carried inside. No title could erase the fact that people only respected the role, not the person. But you, You became undeniable proof that real trust has nothing to do with paper or ranks. It comes from spirit, truth, and essence, and that's something they could never counterfeit. Let it be our life motto. 12th. Their confidence shattered when they realized you don't envy them. Their confidence was built on the illusion that they mattered in your world, that their achievements, their status, and their actions were benchmarks you were constantly measuring yourself against. Their ego fed on the idea that you envied them, that you chased what they had, that their life was somehow a standard for yours. Is it important for you that others envy you? Every word, every action, every subtle taunt was designed to provoke that envy, to confirm that they were ahead. But then came the realization that shook them to the core. You never envied them. Not once. Not in thought, not in feeling, not in your energy. That simple truth destroyed them. They had always assumed that their worth was recognized because others were chasing it, because comparison guaranteed relevance. And suddenly the comparison failed. You were operating on a completely different frequency, one that didn't acknowledge their ladder, their trophies, or their image. Your focus, your growth, your energy had never depended on what they had. And that independence exposed their desperation. It's important to be independent. For the first time, they weren't a standard in your world. They were irrelevant. The realization didn't just bruise their ego, it shattered it. Their confidence had been a house of cards built on the belief that others were watching, measuring, and aspiring to match them. When they saw you operating outside that system, entirely thriving without looking sideways, it made them feel insignificant. Nothing they could do, no title, no manipulation, no subtle intimidation could touch the fact that you were untethered to their validation. What wrecked them even further was that this was so effortless on your part. They had spent years trying to position themselves as someone to envy, as a benchmark for others to chase. You never had to chase anything, never had to compare, never had to prove yourself against them. That refusal to participate in their game revealed the hollowness of their strategy and the fragility of their confidence. In the end, the gap wasn't just in success, influence, or status, it was in mindset. They thrived on being the standard. You thrived on being yourself. And when they realized that their role as the standard no longer applied, their confidence collapsed, because in your world, they simply didn't matter. Let's build our mindset and not our envy. That revelation is brutal because it exposes the truth they could never face. Relevance is not claimed, it's lived, and you had been living it all along. Now let's turn this realization into fuel for your journey. 13th, they couldn't survive the weight of what you survived. They thought they knew struggle. They thought they understood pressure, failure, and disappointment. They compared their lives, their achievements, and their battles to yours, assuming that their efforts, their hardships, and their endurance were on the same level. Do you think struggles matter? But when the truth finally hit, it broke them. They couldn't survive the weight of what you survived. Every obstacle they faced, every crisis they endured was nothing compared to the storms you had weathered, the betrayals you had endured, and the pain you had transformed into strength. The gap between you and them wasn't just about skill, talent, or luck. It was about survival. They may have climbed, learned, and fought, but they had never been forged in the fires that shaped you. Every setback that could have broken them only prepared you. Every betrayal, every loss, every trial added weight to your soul, and that weight didn't crush you. It strengthened you. When they realized that they couldn't even endure half of what you had endured, their confidence collapsed. What is more important, skill or survival? Their sense of superiority, which had thrived on comparisons, shattered under the undeniable truth. Their struggles had been lighter, easier, and less transformative than yours. What made it worse for them was that survival isn't something you can fake. You can study, you can mimic, you can practice skill, but you cannot replicate endurance born from fire. They might have thought they were your equals, but endurance doesn't lie. It exposes every weak point, every fragility, every flaw, and your ability to survive, to carry the weight, and to rise despite it all revealed theirs. Every false sense of superiority they clung to fell away as they watched the evidence of your resilience. Let's admire the survivors. Their achievements, once sources of pride, now looked fragile. Their confidence, once loud and assertive, grew quiet and uncertain. The gap was clear, not just in what you had accomplished, but in what you had endured. The cruel truth they had to face was that survival builds power that no skill, no charm, no cleverness can replicate. And in realizing they could never carry that weight, their ego crumbled. They were left exposed, knowing that no matter how hard they tried to compete with you, the foundation that built you was something they could never touch. That is the kind of revelation that crushes confidence at its core, leaving nothing but the harsh truth of inadequacy. It is impossible to cheat to become a survivor. 14th, they saw the final truth. You were never in competition. They were. They spent years measuring themselves against you, convinced that life was a race, a contest, a zero-sum game where someone had to lose for the other to win. Every step you took, every achievement you unlocked, they treated as a benchmark, a target to beat. They believed their purpose was to surpass you, to prove that they were somehow superior. What are our ultimate targets? And then the truth landed like a bomb. You were never in competition. You never played the game they thought you were playing. That realization shattered them. Their confidence, built on comparisons and the illusion of control, collapsed the moment they saw that you weren't striving to be better than anyone. You weren't trying to outshine, outperform, or outdo them. You weren't even operating on their scoreboard. While they obsessed over rankings, accolades, and recognition, you were expanding, evolving, and transcending dimensions they couldn't even imagine. The gap wasn't distance. It was a completely different plane of existence, a reality where their tactics, their schemes, and their ego-driven strategies no longer applied. Are we able to focus on our own path and not the path of others? What broke them most was the clarity of it. All their efforts to measure themselves against you, all the comparisons they made, all the games they played were meaningless. You didn't need to prove anything, and they weren't capable of reaching the level you had built simply by living authentically, enduring deeply, and moving with vision. Every attempt they made to catch up was like trying to sprint across oceans. They were operating in one dimension while you were already thriving in another. The irony crushed them. They had thought they were the ones setting the pace, dictating the rules, and maintaining superiority. Instead, they discovered that the rules didn't apply to you. Their obsession with being better only highlighted their limitation, while your freedom, growth, and unshakable presence illuminated the truth. You had never been in the same race. By the time they accepted it, the damage was done. They were left exposed, their ego fractured, their confidence in tatters. Remember, the race against yourself matters most. They had fought shadows, measured themselves against illusions, and realized too late that you were untouchable, not because of what you did, but because of who you were. They were the ones trapped in competition, and you were the one living beyond it. The truth is undeniable. The gap between you and them was never about luck, talent, or chance. It was about depth, resilience, and essence. While they relied on appearances, validation, and borrowed confidence, you thrived on authenticity, discipline, and the strength forged through every trial you survived. Every attempt they made to undermine, compete with, or control you only highlighted their limitations and fueled your rise. Always rely on yourself, not the outside world. Every scheme, every comparison, every hollow achievement of theirs was a stepping stone for your growth. They were trapped in a game they created, constantly performing, chasing approval, and measuring themselves against illusions. You, on the other hand, moved in a realm beyond their reach, building enduringly and thriving without ever needing to prove yourself. Your silence spoke louder than their noise. Your presence outweighed their applause, and your essence eclipsed their charisma. They thought they were shaping the world around you, but all they did was reveal the truth. You were never in competition, and they could never catch up. This is the ultimate revelation. Your strength, integrity, and authenticity are untouchable. This is the ultimate revelation which must be applied in our daily lives. Their confidence shattered, not because of what you showed them, but because of what they could never replicate. The ability to survive, grow, and transcend without compromise. The gap is not just distance. It's a dimension they can't enter, a plane of existence built from lived truth, endurance, and spirit. For those watching, this isn't just a story about overcoming others. It's a testament to the power of being untouchable from the inside, the inside, the inside, the inside, the inside, the inside.